Okay, hello everybody. Let's get started. Today we will be talking about whether we should live with zero COVID or live with COVID. Obviously, in most Western countries, including Australia, we think we are now having the policy of living with the COVID. Whereas in China, it's still looking for a zero COVID scenario. So there's a difference between the two policies. So let me present you with some data from the Chinese side, and then we can go into a discussion whether a zero tolerance to COVID is a good social choice or not. So this is coming from the Global Times, which is a Chinese newspaper. A number of leading corporate control the Western mass media are currently belittling and attacking China's zero COVID-19 strategy as authoritarian and non-viable. Headlines like this: how long can China's zero COVID-19 policy last? China's COVID-19 zero strategy risks leaving it isolated for years. China is policing speech that supports living with COVID. Meanwhile, the COVID-19 death of Colin Powell reminds the world to be skeptical of propaganda aimed at targeted countries, etc. So these are some of the headlines picked up by the Global Times from the Western media. What?
After COVID broke out, Donald Trump once vowed, "It is just a normal flu, what's the fuss about?" Kept attending fancy parties and my senses came. All the confirmed cases was I saw the goers' names.
It was never just a flu, this is what we had to do. Faster was in 10 days, not a year or two. Solved problem number one, now to problem number two. All the signs of infections we insist on looking through. Would you take some measures too?
No, all is great. You don't have to do nothing and just wait till this May. Must reuse a disinfectant, chloroquine with A. Cases more than 1 million, WHO to place.
Stay at home, get your work done, follow the rules to virus gone.
I saw your party, one was wrong.
We are rushing to Wuhan.
Why would you go out of your mind?
I knew what I had to do. Throughout China's 5,000-year history, whenever crisis strikes, we're united as one.
Doctors come send and then you fight together till we succeed. Testing, tracing, won't need to. It's no way just a flu. You break this spirit so they obey. Never do anything you say. Maybe you'd call it Bruce, right? I just want freedom in my way. I ask you, isn't it an abbreviation of freedom to obey the rules?
Oh no, only amply harmful freedom every day. As citizens, we live up to our country's aim.
Far and wide I rule the earth with a beautiful slogan. But there is more in mind, I have a greater plan. Manipulating WHO is fun. Label China the origin like the Spanish one. Vaccine testing, RA tracing, gotta find something. Evidence lacking, fine. Let leak theory calming.
Why wasting your time while so many people die? Talking about human rights, don't care about people's lives.
Like, would I sit by and wait for the world to see how I fail? No, gonna find a scapegoat. Inside anger and hatred, and you know what they say. A rumor once a day keeps your enemies away. Don't be fooled by the endless fight. Only aims to put you on trial. Alright, to the banana people, run hold on to the moment goes. As long as people's lives are safe, the better day. We're no longer Afghanistan. We're always happy to bear
Okay, obviously this is a propaganda from the Chinese. Let's look at the new cases per day. It was a couple of thousand new cases in 2020, and then now we are talking about 26 cases as of August 25th, 2021. So this has been the number of cases per day from China. We see that, yes, after the initial outbreak, then basically China has only up to 100 or 200 cases per day at the most, and it has been able to keep a very low infection rate since then. As of the 1st of November, the total cases in China is 97,000 cases with 6,600 more deaths. Whereas in the world, we are looking at 246 million cases with over 5 million deaths. So there is a very large contrast. Now, with the Delta variant spreading, is China's zero tolerance COVID approach sustainable? I think that is the question. Okay, go on.
Well, looking overseas, China locking down a small northwest county bordering Mongolia after it saw the most COVID-19 cases of the Delta variant. With nearly 1/3 of the over 150 infections over the past week, it's the current outbreak's hotspot and threatening to spiral into a nationwide surge. China reported 35 new local cases yesterday, including in Beijing. The count also includes some reclassifications of previously asymptomatic cases. With more is our China correspondent, Elizabeth Law, joining me from Beijing. So Liz, China reported 39 new cases yesterday, including 35 local cases. So how worrying is this emergence of new infections?
Right. I think how worrying it is, we can take an indication from what Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, who is the top official that is in charge of the COVID response in China, what she said last week during a meeting. So I quote from here, she says that the current situation now and the way it is developing seems a bit unstable, and so we're not sure, and therefore she says more preventive measures have to be taken. And clearly over the weekend things have really escalated, because now in Beijing as of today there are now 15 cases in several different areas, including Fengtai and Haidian, which are kind of far away from the city center, but these are fairly affluent districts as well. And how these people got infected with because they had gone on driving holidays to nearby Inner Mongolia, and that's another focal point of the outbreak at the moment. Speaking of Inner Mongolia, they've actually put about 20,000 people under strict lockdown today. The local authorities have told the residents there that they will not be allowed to leave their homes. So that gives you an idea of the scale, once again, of this outbreak that is happening here in China.
Well, Liz, you earlier mentioned about preventive measures. So what are the authorities doing to keep the growing cases under control?
Right. This is something that we've written about many times over the past year or so. And again, China is returning to this playbook that is well tested, well tried and tested, where they take very strict, very targeted, but very muscular measures whenever there are new cases. So what's happened now is that because a focal point appears to be Inner Mongolia, which is a popular tourist hotspot. So what happens is that anyone with travel history to that place has been ordered either to do a nucleic acid test, or some have been told to isolate themselves at home. Within the area itself, in Inner Mongolia, as I mentioned earlier, residents have all been ordered to stay home in order to prevent movement of people. And of course, Beijing is now being very strict about anyone who is coming into the city from outside of Beijing. But of course, once again, I have to caveat that Beijing is being extra strict because this is the capital city after all, and we are expecting an important political meeting in about 3 weeks' time. So they are working to make sure that there are no slip-ups.
But what China is doing on a wider scale is very different to what many other countries have decided to do, that is to live with COVID-19. And I believe that, China is virtually the only country in the world sticking to a zero tolerance strategy. Liz, can it maintain this approach, or is it contemplating also living with COVID-19?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? So last week, we wrote a story about how there are several top doctors here who are now suggesting that they may start to ease up a bit, because this is going to be a prolonged battle. And the doctors, which include Dr. Zhong Nanshan, the top epidemiologist, and the head of the CDC, Dr. George Gao, who said that, in the long-term battle, this sort of lockdowns, they aren't going to work anymore because people get tired. There will still be cases that will go through the cracks. So what they have suggested is that it has to go in tandem with a strong vaccination rollout. China is now asking people to take their booster shots as well. Anyone who has had their vaccines more than 6 months ago can now go for 3 booster shots. And they are also suggesting that, for the sake of the economy and really in terms of the general health of the country, they need to start easing up a little bit. That being said, we are expecting a number of important events, including the Winter Olympics that will be early next year. So I don't think we're going to see easing in terms of what we're seeing in Europe, in terms of the West, and even in Singapore. I think it will be very gradual, but at the end of the day, I think the sense on the ground is that China cannot go on with this sort of strict closed-off measure for the next 2 to 5 years.
Okay, so that is from Straits Times from Singapore. But what China has done is they have built something called International Health Station. This one is from Guangzhou, the capital in Guangdong, and that is one of those main entrance of foreigners into China. And they have opened up a 5,000 room quarantine center for overseas arrivals. Now that this quarantine center has opened, many other cities is going to copy the same formula and going to build large-scale quarantine centers so that all foreigners entering China will have their quarantine done in these quarantine centers. These centers will be remote from the main city center, and the people arriving basically from airports will be transported to this quarantine center directly with a bus, and then they will undergo their quarantine requirement in this center. And the people working in this center will include both psychologists as well as medical professionals. Now, these people working in this quarantine center will work a shift of about 28 days, 4 weeks, before they have a break. So they will be working 7 days for 28 days, 4 weeks, and then they will have to self-quarantine in their home during the break for about 2 weeks before they can have a holiday. So these people probably will have a 25 days on, 25 days off, and then come back to the quarantine centers to work. So that is the current strategy. And this quarantine center in Guangzhou has already been opened. I suppose it will be used for the Winter Olympics in 2022. Whether there is a similar quarantine center in Beijing, we don't know yet. But once you undergone the quarantine in this center, then you can travel freely with a health code on your smartphone. Then you can travel freely without wearing mask and without further quarantine. Okay, here are some looks here. When it comes to keeping COVID at bay, few countries seem willing to go as far as China. As country grows around the world, we open borders, loosen coronavirus restriction. The Beijing is doubling down on its zero COVID strategy. The 5,000 room quarantine facility in Guangzhou cost Beijing $260 million. They comprise of 3-story buildings topped with gray roofs in a traditional Chinese style, massive complex span an area of 46 football fields, and it took them less than 3 months to build it from scratch on a outskirts of the city. It will replace the designated quarantine hotels. Travelers will be transported using buses. It is the first of its kind in China, and then there will be other centers opening up. So I'm not going to read through this. Anyone would like to have more information can go to the YouTube, which I will post after we have done this. So all this, the project is picking up, and there are 4,000 workers assigned to build it, etc., etc. And the first batch, there will be 184 medical staff moving in to prepare for its official launch. It has already been launched. Of course, they face a tough job ahead, and the complex is designed as a bubble to be isolated from the rest of the city. Obviously, China is moving to tighten the quarantine measures. Now, earlier this month, officials announced that 1 billion people has been fully inoculated with domestically made vaccines that account for 71% of the China's 1.4 billion population, a rate higher than many countries. But we are very close. I think we are almost close to 80% now in Australia. So we are doing very well compared with China. But just remember, we have only about 20 million people, where China has 1.6 billion. So there is a large difference there. Of course, the main question is how will China make sure that the Winter Olympics in 2020, which is less than 100 days from now, will be held. The international ethics and the media allowed to enter China for the event will be living in a heavily guarded bubble under restrictions that will make the summer games in Tokyo look relaxed. There is no public debate in China about countries' long-term plans for managing COVID-19. Scientists who have suggested China needs to coexist with the virus are brand enemies of the state. So China is still very much focused on the same zero tolerance strategy. However, the Chinese public are largely supportive of the policy that have spared them the lockdowns and mass deaths experienced elsewhere in the world. Now, as of October 13, China has recorded 6,000 something deaths since the start of the pandemic, even accounting for the casualties in Wuhan in the early 2020. That is a fraction of deaths recorded in countries such as US. Now, Australia, our little population of about 20 million has recorded 1,400 something deaths. Today, Australia has recorded 1,800 deaths. So for the number of deaths per capita, China is very small compared with the rest of the world. The Delta variant has reached China's defense several times this year, but still they managed to control it by locking down a city, a section of city or a community in a very fast response. Why China's zero COVID-19 policy deserves defending? That is, again, I come from the Global Times. A careful analysis based on science and evidence and not on propaganda demonstrate that zero COVID-19 policy pioneered by China and a few other countries are arguably the only way to end the pandemic. To understand why, we need to examine China's approach in the context of 4 possible approaches to the pandemic. One, herd immunity was first proposed by United Kingdom, and mitigation and national elimination, and then global eradication. Herd immunity essentially means eliminating using mitigation methods and not using any other mitigation methods to slow down or stop the virus. So just let the virus go through the population and then build up a immunity of. We notice it doesn't work. United Kingdom have tried it, and then they reverse back to the lockdown anyway. Now, I'm going to some examples. In the US, for example, schools are now open for the 4th semester. They are autumn in the Northern Hemisphere, and people are pushing back to work. But the infection level is around 100,000 cases per day. Now, today, the United States infections is about 40,000 cases. But today's number reflect only Saturday and Sunday, which is typically smaller. On average, the United States today record about 60 to 80,000 cases per day. So that is a huge amount of people getting infected every day. In countries like the US, it has been argued that if almost everyone is vaccinated and with no other protections, the virus will be stopped except for breakthrough infections. Unfortunately, breakthrough infection is now very real. The vaccines do have to minimize the symptoms and deaths, but it doesn't stop the spreading of the virus, and that is why it's called breakthrough. In fact, research studies have found that the COVID-19 cases, including mild cases, are linked to serious health damage. A large-scale study published in a British medical journal, The Lancet, in July this year, shows that COVID-19, including mild cases or serious cases, is linked to a substantial deficit in intelligence. Individuals recover from COVID-19 were found to have a frequently lost between 10 to 1 IQ points, depending on the severity of their previous infections. Brain studies of post-COVID-19 patients reported by Harvard are also showing actual brain damage. Post-COVID-19 ongoing fatigue and tiredness have also been found to be serious common life problems. Organ damage has been reported by both Chinese and Western scientists. So even if we have the vaccine, we have a lesser damage to our body, there is still damage with whether you are mild case or serious case. Now, mitigation immediately means slowing down the virus spread, but not extinguishing it by taking partial measures, which include closing down places where people gather in groups like nightclubs and bars, closing some but not all essential workplaces, using facial masks partially or wholly closing school on a temporary basis. The weakness of this approach is obvious. It can reduce the daily rates of new cases, but it does not cut off the chain of transmission, but allows for a slower but continuing spread of the virus, which then responds to higher infection rates when measures are relaxed. Moreover, by allowing substantial numbers of people to continue to be infected, it provides human breeding grounds for the evolution of new and possibly even more deadly variants, like the Delta variant. Elimination means eliminating the virus in one country. This involves ensuring people who have virus do not come into contact with people who don't have, so the virus cannot spread and die and eventually die out. And that is the zero COVID strategy adopted by China. At the same time, they make use of mass testing and tracing of anyone who had contacts with a new carrier. A carrier out as a city or area becomes virus free, it must not be connected to areas where the virus is still active and the campaign to cure it is still ongoing. Cities which are cleared can then be reconnected to another. This can only happen provided the travel restrictions and controls, such as testing before travel, are imposed in any city where the virus reappears. Eradication means we eliminate the virus on a world scale. Now, is that possible? Well, I can give you an example of a possible case. That is about 12 years ago or 13 years ago, we have this SARS, and the SARS is now eliminated because SARS is much more deadlier than COVID. And because of that, people take a very serious quarantine, and then it is eradicated. But unfortunately, COVID is not as deadly, but it's much more infectious. So there are differences. And because of this difference, it is very difficult to eliminate COVID at the time being. It is not worth noting that while domestic infections are virtually eliminated in China, all of the recent relatively small outbreaks have been quelled in China. Even these were started from travelers from other infected countries and regions who brought the virus with them. Hence, the argument put forward by China that COVID is a world crisis and only world eradication can stop it. That is the China's position. It is high time that Western media and political leaders who seek to demonize China's zero COVID policy consider ending the mass infections, deaths, and health damage to children and adults from long-term ravaging COVID-19. They must think about adopting a zero COVID-19 policy. That is from, as I said, the Global Times. This one is from US Today, from a Deborah something. Crimes against humanity charge recommended against the president for Brazil COVID-19 deaths. So the Brazil Senate have a 7-person investigation. I think it's 7-person or maybe 11, something like that. A Senate investigation where their president has neglected his duty to protect this, Brazil's citizens from COVID-19. And the report found the president responsible. And now we are waiting for the Attorney General in Brazil to whether they charge the president for murdering about 300,000 Brazilians. Okay, that's an 11 members committee. So it is past 7-4, saying that the government has been handling the pandemic wrongly. And COVID had caused about 600,000 people died. And they make the president account for about half of these deaths. That means they are going to charge their president for killing 300,000 people because of his or lack of COVID response. Now, prison time for those convicted range from between 20 to 30 years. So this is a very serious case. But whether he will eventually be charged and then convicted, we don't know. But there is a possibility there. The president is account for violating health protocols, charlatanism, falsification of private documents, irregular use of public funds, crimes against humanity, violation of social rights, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's a number of charges. But anyway, we have to wait to see whether how the case may go on, or whether the case will go on or not. We don't know yet. And this is for ABC, why Chinese citizens support COVID-0, even if it means being cut off from family. So this is from our own ABC. Well, there is a lot of criticism against this, and then there are some people quoting it. Now, in order to travel in China, they need a QR code, the COVID QR code, which will be colored in green, yellow, and red. For those who have the green code, they can travel freely. For those who have yellow code, then they will have to receive a COVID test ASAP. And for those who have a red code, they will have to lock down and restricted from traveling. Basically, anybody with a red code won't even be allowed on a public bus. And in all those public buildings, they will not be even allowed to go out of the building. So basically, they want to stop the people with the red QR code. Here are a sample of the QR code, and this QR code comes from the Hangzhou area. So every city will have a slightly different code, but all the codes will have a green, yellow, and red. So people can just look at your smartphone, and then you scan your smartphone with the QR code, and if you are verified that you have a green code, then you can go out. And you find you have a red code, then you have to quarantine for 7 days, and during that time you will have to take at least 2 COVID tests. For anyone with a red code, you have to self-quarantine for 14 days. And then it will change back to green, and then you can travel again. So that is how the COVID health code works in China. Here is an example for a Mrs. Gao, and she comes from a southwest Sichuan province, and her QR code turned yellow because she had been at a local location close to an exposure site. The local authority was alerted. Within an hour, she was sent to a nearby hospital to start her quarantine. And after being tested negative twice in 2 days, she was released, and her code changed back to green. That is how the Chinese policy going. Rapid tracing and rapid response to anyone who may potentially get into contact with a COVID case. And she said, and there's no such thing like Australia that one venue allows only a certain number of people. No, in China, a venue is, when it's open, it's fully open, but it is only allowed for people to have a a green code to go in. If you don't have a green code, sorry, you can't go anywhere. And so there is no number of restrictions on venues. When the venue is open, it is open fully. So it's quite different from our policy here. Another second example is another Beijing resident. His daughter is in Australia, and he haven't seen her for almost 2 years. And obviously, we can't go to China to visit our relatives anyway. So, but he said, "Oh, I don't want her to come back. Although we miss her, but for the sake of the entire community, please don't come back, because the people in Beijing support this idea. But anyway, that is better than before. At least we have video conferencing and we can get in touch with other through technology quite easily these days. So the other policy, of course, is coexisting with COVID-19. This is about the number of dead people back in the times when I prepared this slide. We have over 5 million people killed by the coronavirus worldwide. And at that time, the main infections are shown in the map here. It was in Europe and obviously in America as well, including the South America. This is the number of cases. UK, and that was the UK's daily new cases. So actually, looking at the map, I would say recently the number of cases in United Kingdom is very, very large because it's all adding up. People don't get infected on one day and then suddenly next day they are free. You have to work through the virus. We know that an infection will at least stop you from feeling well for about 2 weeks or about 1 week. So adding up the number of active cases is actually much higher than the peak in January this year, 2021. Active cases has been rising. So it is over 1,050,000 cases in October 23rd. The number of deaths is much better. Okay, the number of deaths per day is much smaller than the previous 2 peaks because United Kingdom is one of the countries which started the immunization the earliest. Actually, the United Kingdom started the the vaccines earlier than United States. This table shows the deaths between those vaccinated and those without vaccination. And we see that for those unvaccinated, the death in America, no, this is from United Kingdom, okay, is 38,000. And then for those who are vaccinated is 400 something. So vaccination protect you from deaths. So it's quite obvious from the data here. This is another look at the data. This is not in percentage. So when you have received the second dose, and then your death rate compare with the unvaccinated, okay? The unvaccinated here, we're looking at 849, whereas the vaccinated is 26.2. So there's a huge difference between those vaccinated and those not vaccinated. This is another look, and this one is from Washington Post. Again, looking at these are the unvaccinated and the vaccinated here. In the United States, they have already passed 748,000 people dead. And for the fully vaccinated, the number of cases is at this level, whereas for those unvaccinated, it is 6 times higher. In terms of death, it is 12 times higher for those unvaccinated. For Europe, as the virus continues to surge, a number of European countries consider lockdowns again. Today, we have the news that Austria has just implemented a law locking down all those who are not vaccinated. And for those who are vaccinated, you can go through your life normally. But for all those unvaccinated, they are under lockdown, and that is effective on their time, Monday midnight. Europe has once again becomes the epicenter, and close to 2 million cases were reported in Europe last week, and that is now 2 weeks ago. Here is the European data. I am arranging it from the new cases from large to small. So about on November 12th, Germany has 68,000 cases per day, or new cases. UK has 40,000, Russia 40,000, Ukraine 24,000, etc., etc. And Russia is now having a very high death rate. The column here, the second last column, is the number of cases for every X people. So for UK, there is 1 case per 7 people, and there's 1 death per 479 people. The worst case in this area is Chechnya. It has 1 case per 6 people, and it has 1 death per 342 people among their population. So it is about 0.3% death rate. This is the new cases in Germany, and we know that it is rising very quickly as of the 12th of November. And this is the new cases as of United Kingdom, and this is Russia. Russia is very bad, and this is the number of deaths of Russia is increasing rapidly. And this is Ukraine. Ukraine is not looking good, but it is starting to fail. So I hope they can keep on going down. The number of deaths, I hope it also start going down, but we have to remember the number of deaths, the peak is about 1 week behind the daily infections. Netherlands, Poland, Austria, Czechia. Okay, this is from last week. What's this? I thought the population, the capital. What I'm talking, why I'm including this, I don't know. I can't remember now. Number of high-income consumers. Okay, this is about the. No, sorry. This is from last week. We had several questions from last week talking about the inequality of China. Sorry, this is not about the topic today. So let me just stop here. Let us have a little bit of discussion. Then we'll spend some time talking about the questions from last week. So anyone who has questions, please unmute yourself, and then you can ask a question. Anyone? No?
Is anyone else other than China aiming at a zero strategy, or is it only China?
I think New Zealand is also trying a zero COVID strategy, but their population is much smaller than us. I think they have about 5 million people. So they do try to follow a zero COVID case, but I don't know how they're going on at the moment.
Albert, given that China will have to deal with the rest of the world eventually, they can't be locked down forever. Do you think that their zero tolerance is sustainable in the long run?
This is really a good question, and the answer is I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that whilst as a totalitarian authority, that they can order their people to do certain things that the Western countries can't do because of the so-called democracy issue. But once they open up to the rest of the world, both inwards and outwards travel, surely they must face the same risks that the Western countries do in terms of the exposure to COVID.
Yeah, I totally agree. So now, as I have pointed out, they are building those so-called the quarantine centers. Okay, so whether they will insist that all travelers coming from countries which have active cases underwent 2 weeks of quarantine, whether they can implement the policy, we don't know. And obviously, this policy will make any travel to China a huge cost to the traveler for whatever reason. We just can't imagine ourselves spending 2 weeks in a quarantine center.
Yeah.
So at
the moment, if I wanted to go to China, would I then need to spend 2 weeks in Chengdu in that 5,000 room center, or what? Or even if I wanted to go somewhere else, how does that work?
Now, at the moment, for example, I have a friend who is a professor at Sydney, one of Sydney's universities teaching law. He went to China on business. So he left Australia in about March. He is still in Hong Kong. So he has, in his travel, he has spent about a month in quarantine. So when he first arrived in China, he went into a quarantine hotel. At that time, the quarantine center hasn't been open yet. So he has to stay in a designated hotel for 2 weeks before he is allowed to go into China for his business. So he after 2 weeks, he went through China a number of cities, meeting a number of business people which he is dealing with. And then being a Hong Kong people, like me, he came from Hong Kong. So he went to Hong Kong. From China going to Hong Kong, there's no need for quarantine. Then after about a month in Hong Kong, he go back to mainland China to continue with his business. Then he went into quarantine again for at least 2 weeks, because from Hong Kong into China, because Hong Kong is not a zero COVID, so they have to go through quarantine, and so he go through quarantine for another 2 weeks before he can travel in China, do his business. And I think he is now on his way back to Australia, but he said he has spent at least 1 month in quarantine because he need to enter China twice. And that is the situation at the moment for any visitor to China. Whether that policy will change or not, we don't know, and I don't see any reason for Chinese to relax that. And yes.
Albert, I read a medical report from China which basically said that, you have to, the medical people have to agree with the with the zero controls, but they were recognizing that sometime in the future, they will relax them, but not at the moment.
I think, again, it depends on whether the policy can sustain, or whether the policy got the citizens' approval. So if the Chinese people becomes too unbearable with this policy, then I think the Chinese government might have to change. A lot of people argue that the Chinese government doesn't have to listen to its people, but the fact is that the Chinese government is very much concerned with how the people feel. And so it will depend on the people's opinion. But I think at the moment, the Chinese government is still getting a huge support from the a large percentage of the Chinese population supporting the current COVID cases. And a number of health professionals is now trying to release the balloon, so to speak, to see whether there's any change of attitude by the Chinese population. And so far, the answer is the Chinese population is still very much supportive of the zero COVID. So this so-called opinion balloons is still showing that the Chinese people support zero COVID. So I think over time, this kind of opinion balloons will be released every now and then by the so-called medical professionals, and trying to understand whether the Chinese population is going to change the attitude. As long as the main large number of Chinese population doesn't change the magnitude, I think the Chinese government will still insist on this zero COVID. Because now, look, if now China has about 4 times the population of the United States. So at the moment, the number of deaths in United States is already past about 780 million people. So let's run it up to say 800,000 people died from COVID in United States. It is an overestimation at the moment, but I think the United States will reach 800,000, no doubt. It just depends on how long it takes them to reach this 800,000 deaths. So we multiply this number by 4, which is the 4 times the population of China. We were looking at 3.2 million people deaths just from China. And then that means there will be 3.2 million families affected. And let's say every family has a relative number of relatives of say 4, okay? At least a family, even you don't have children, you both, the husband and wife each have their parents. So one death in one family would at least impact on at least minimum 4 people, 4 relatives. And that means we are looking at 12 million people affected. I think that will cause a huge backlash of the opinion by these 12 million people in China. Yes, we agree, 1.4 billion people, 12 million is not a lot, but this 12 million noisy minority can cause the government to change policy.
Albert, I'm not just saying if I agree with your analysis there, because there's no question at the moment that because there's so few deaths in China, that the population will probably favor what's going on.
Yep.
But at some time or other in the future, they may decide, and it's likely to be more like the government than the population, decide that they need to open up more when the world is caught up to some extent in preventing its spread because of the economic situation. And I think at that particular time, they will just make different decisions. And I don't think necessarily it will be because of the population.
Well, in terms of economics, China is the first country to restore its normal economic activity. Basically, in about May 2020 last year, the Chinese economy basically returned to normal. You look at the GDP growth at the moment in China, it is reporting at around 5.9% in the 3rd quarter, which is a little bit of underestimate in the world response. People had expected China to have a 6% growth of GDP in the 3rd quarter, but it is now 5.9, so which is below expectation. But you look at the rest of the world, and for example, in the United States, they are having the problem of a huge inflation. The inflation in October is 6.2%. And then in terms of logistics, we now know that the world logistics almost ground to a halt. In the West Coast of United States, there's about 100 container ships waiting to get onto the port to unload. And current before COVID, a container coming out from Shanghai and going to Los Angeles is about $4,000. But now the same container moving from Shanghai to Los Angeles will cost about $30,000 because of the logistic. So there is a huge deterrent of business around the world, but except China. China's economy is going on almost normal, not exactly as high as people expected. As I just quoted, they are not achieving 6% growth in the third quarter, 5.9, but still a very significant growth compared with the rest of the world, where we see a 6% inflation rate in the United States, and probably the inflation rate in Australia may be at 3 or 4%. We are not. So in terms of economy, the Chinese economy is going on well. Now, China also has switched to a so-called dual track economy. That means they will have a domestic circulation, which will boost their domestic economy. And then they will, of course, have the international circle of economy. That means they will still maintain their import exports, but they will shift their economic activity from a export-driven economy into a domestic consumer-driven economy. The current estimate of the number of middle class in China is about 400 million. And the United States has always been the largest middle class consumer market. But the United States population is around 350 million. So the number of middle class in China is already larger than the population of the whole of the United States. So it is very likely that China can maintain the economic growth by focusing on domestic economy. Of course, domestic economy won't account for 100% of their economy. Let's say the domestic economy increases from 30% to 40% of their total economy. And then let's say the domestic economy grows at, let's say 6% or 8%. It still contribute quite a number of growth for them. 6 by 4 is 2.4. So it will produce about 2.4% GDP growth annually from just the domestic market. If they can grow the domestic market at 8%, which is quite easy to do. If you really want to grow the domestic market in China, so you just need to have some, like everywhere else, give the citizens a bit of money, then they will spend it. So growing domestic economy is okay. So of course, I don't want the Chinese economy to be isolated from the world economy, but China has the potential to be isolated if they want to. But I really don't want that to happen. But it will hurt everybody. But the China government will survive. Put it that way.
Albert, if I take your argument that you just put forward as elimination as compared to the West, I think you've defeated your own argument, personally.
How?
Maybe, but I think that the West might change its views if long COVID starts affecting the health of children, and obviously the jury's still out on that.
Yeah.
A lot of mothers might change their mind and say, look, I don't care what these ratbags are doing in Spring Street with their signs. I want my kid to have the best intelligence have, and we need to change the rules. So there's a noisy minority here that, with a dictator Dan signs, but we might change if If they start
Well,
finding
put
that
it
long
this
COVID,
way.
long COVID affects the,
Yeah.
you know, the intelligence, health of children and teenagers, we might swing to a New Zealand style.
I agree, Michael, and I think if we look at the long COVID evidence that's starting to come out now, within months, I think that's going to be a really serious issue. I really do. Yep.
And the other fact is, I don't think China
if the
can
world
still
can
have.
agree, let me put it this way: if the world can agree to say we all cram down and lock down our societies at the same time for 2 weeks, okay, we cram down everybody, the whole world cram down on 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks, the COVID is almost gone, except in a few spots which may last another 2 weeks. But for most of the world, 2 weeks calm down hard. We get prepared first. So let's say, okay, we will announce that in December, okay, from the 1st of December for 2 weeks, the world will calm down. Please prepare yourself for surviving at home for 2 weeks, and we will have policing all the cities, make sure nobody come out for 2 weeks.
But that's idealistic. That's idealistic, Albert. I mean,
of course, this is idealistic.
There are countries in the world that just can't do that.
Yeah, I
understand. I mean, they live by each other's side, and we have migrant camps all over the world with millions of people crammed into square mileage. I mean, it's just that's just idealistic. That's never going to happen.
Yeah,
never going to happen.
Idealistic. But if we can I agree on that one, we will still have a few spots, for example, India, okay, or in Africa, a few spots where the COVID can still be spreading. But then we can just restrict those citizens from this area to travel to other countries without quarantine. So they are spreading inside their country, but we make sure their virus don't come out. I understand there will be a pocket of area which will not clamp it down seriously. Even in a country, maybe in Australia, we clamp down almost everybody except Melbourne, maybe. Okay, then
Albert,
we can clamp it down Melbourne.
Albert, I've got a question. Regarding your vaccines, I believe there's 50 plus vaccines being developed now.
Yeah.
We're talking about opening the world. Where does China stand as far as accepting people being vaccinated? And I believe, I'm not sure that the vaccinations given to the Chinese is acceptable in Europe or Australia. Is that the case?
Now, there are 2 vaccines produced by Chinese, which is now widely accepted. For example, Australia accepts the Sinovac and the Sinopharm, 2 vaccines from China. Okay. China has about 6 different vaccines coming out, and the first 2 are the Sinovac and the Sinopharm. Both of them are accepted by the WHO. And because it's accepted by WHO, it is also accepted by many countries, including Australia. Okay, Australia accepted the Sinovac. In terms of, for example, G7, during G7, we know that 7 countries meet in England. Okay, and although China is not within G7, you know that the the COVID test for the journalists to participate in G7 were produced by China. That's very interesting. But one of the journalists have taken a photograph of the test kit, and they found that it is made in China for G7 meetings. And now, another case is Xi Jinping haven't get out of China for 21 months now. Part of the reason is he wants to be an example to the Chinese people. If he go out from China, attack anything, then when he come back, he will have to go into quarantine. And of course, we know that there are a number of Chinese officials going to quarantine. For example, the foreign minister, Wang Yi, but he is always in quarantine at the moment. Whenever he go out, come back to China, he's in quarantine, and then he work from quarantine, and then he go out again, and then come back quarantine. And obviously, the other minister doesn't want to have the same issue, including Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping is not going out. I don't think Xi Jinping will be visiting any countries in the next 20 months as well. So unfortunate for him, can't visit anybody. But that is the situation at the moment in China. So as I say, this is a very controversial topic. I'm just going to present to you the information. Okay, so whether it is a good strategy, bad strategy, whether we can accept it or not, it's up to us, because every country should be able to make their own decision. But personally, I think if the world can agree on a hard lockdown for, let's say, 2 weeks, we solve a significant part of the problem. Just like the SARS, remember SARS 12 years, 30 years ago. Today, we have no SARS. SARS is eliminated. But that was because the virus itself is much more dangerous in terms of fatality. It kills. But it also spread less infectious than the COVID. And COVID is not as deadly, but it is much more infectious. That makes COVID so difficult to contain. Just like the flu. Flu is not very deadly, but it is quite infectious. But because it's not deadly, we can live with it. So we have flu shots, vaccine shots every year in order to cope with flu. But unfortunately, COVID's death rate is about 10 times higher than the normal flu. So we can't treat COVID like the flu because it is much more deadly than the flu. And it is more infectious than the flu as well. And that makes COVID different.
Just on the economy point of view, I think that just because you can't travel to China and do business, I mean, you can do it by Zoom and lots of other ways.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that, you know, if you really need to go to China, if it's that desperate you have to physically be there, 2 weeks is not much of a penalty.
Yeah.
But I would have thought the Chinese economy can still flourish quite well under the current rules because, you know, the actual goods going out of China don't have to be tested for COVID. It's only people going to and fro that get tested. So provided they can survive without business people physically going to China, or if they do go to China, they have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. It seems to me that it may not affect the Chinese economy very much.
Oh, just like my friend who went to China in March. He went through almost a week of quarantine because he entered China twice. But that's acceptable because to him, he had to be there for some serious projects. So he had to be there, as you say, 4 weeks total in quarantine is a price to pay. You really have to do it. But again, with today's technology, a lot of things we don't have to be there personally. So I think it's a matter of how we, the rest of the world, treat our COVID. Are we using this on and off lockdown, or are we going to say like Australia here, when we have over 80% vaccination, we open up, and then today Victoria still have about 800 new cases. So,
Albert,
yeah.
The efficiency of the Chinese virus vaccines is not very high. So could you say that China does not have the option of opening up?
the efficiency is not as high, but the other way to deal with this is a higher number of people getting vaccinated. So it is to stop now. What is the original thinking about vaccine is that if we have, say, vaccinated a certain percentage of people, then this virus will stop spreading, because when the vaccine is in contact with a vaccinated people, it can't infect the people, and therefore it stops. Okay, so that was the original thinking. But unfortunately, for all the vaccines today, including the Western vaccines, there are breakthroughs. That means when vaccinated people got into contact with the virus, they still have a chance of being infected, and therefore they carries the vaccine, and therefore it doesn't stop the spread of the vaccine. And that is the problem at the moment. And whether the Chinese vaccine and the Western vaccines all have the same problem, they cannot stop the COVID from spreading. And that is the issue. Whether the efficiency is, let's say, 70%, 80%, etc. It doesn't matter. And in terms of the efficiency of the vaccines, there's a article come out for the 3 American vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson, the biotech, as well as the Pfizer, the three different vaccines. They compare the efficiency in March 2021 and September 2021, so 6 months apart, and they found that all the 3 vaccines had dropped about 80% of their efficiency. So for the Johnson & Johnson, I think its efficiency is at 73% in March, which drops to about 13% in September. So all vaccines in the world has dropped its efficiency because probably the virus has mutated. So they have been a bit more tolerance towards the vaccine, and therefore the efficiency has dropped. And therefore we are hearing a lot of argument that we have to do the 3rd dose as a booster. So at the moment, there's a lot of discussion about what should be the vaccine for the 3rd dose. There are two camps here. One camp is that the 3rd dose should be the same as your 1st and 2nd. But there's another camp saying that no, that is not good, because we know that the 1st and 2nd dose vaccine efficiency had decreased. You should take a different vaccine for your 3rd dose. There's different argument. And hopefully, being a different vaccine, it will trigger a different immunization response for your body, so that you have boost up your immunity response. So the 3rd dose is now starting to discuss whether the world should have a 3rd dose. The WHO is against 3rd dose. The argument is that for the developed country, for the rich country like ours, we have already achieved an 80% vaccine cover. But for the poor country, like African countries, their vaccine cover is still single digit at the moment. So whether it would be fair to have some of those vaccines made available to this poor country to boost up their overall vaccinated number before we have the 3rd dose is again a moral question. Should we be using up the vaccine production capability to have us have the 3rd dose, or let some of this vaccine productivity to be used for the world's poorer nations? But again, vaccines efficiency is dropping, whether it is from China or from the West. Still saying they are dropping. So we are talking about the third dose at the moment.
Albert, I think it's very unfortunate that we've had vaccine by media, because it's extremely complicated, because we throw around the word efficiency and effectiveness, which are very different for vaccines. And we ignore the fact that it's been an emergency approval by WHO, and what that means in respect to things like the drop-off and the new vaccine using the mRNA haven't been proved, and they are in the long term. And the Chinese one, in fact, is more, one of the Chinese ones at least, is the more traditional one, which will last a lot longer, like a couple of other vaccines will last a lot longer because of they know exactly how it, well, we know exactly how the flu works. We still have to get one every year. But I think novices trying to argue this way, we find that we're well out of our depth. And when you start modeling on these figures, it becomes incredibly crazy.
Yeah, at the moment, this is a very cutting edge issues. Even the medical professionals will be scratching their head to understand all these complicated issues. So for ordinary people like us to discuss it, sometimes we are overreaching our expertise. We don't really know too much about that. But what I can do is just present you with some data, some argument, and then we make up our minds, because that is what we can do best, because we are not specialists. And there's a huge issue here, how we should be dealing with this issue, because what should we trust? Again, can we trust the media? There's another big issue which I haven't touched on. But anyway, up to everybody to make up your mind to say whether we can trust our media to report faithfully what the scientists have said. One of the issues at the moment is, for example, the COP26. Our country is one of the few countries which still haven't rejected coal. China still is one of them. It's just like us, because China still depends a lot of the coal for their electricity generation. But in terms of the global warming, we are heading in a very bad direction, unfortunately. Okay, now if there's no questions, then I will share screen again, and then we'll discuss some of the issues left over from last week. Okay, from last week. Oh, yeah, okay. There's about the income inequality. Okay, this one is about the Chinese income inequality. So we are looking at 2015 compared with 2034. The current policy will make sure that the high income group will be larger, whereas the low income group will be smaller. So that is what the Economist Intelligence Unit by the journal Economist predict China will do. And this is in constant 2015 prices. So if China continue to have the common prosperity, that is what we will be looking at. And then it has a huge discrepancy between cities. On the left here is the Shanghai city, okay? And in the right here is Xi'an, which is a Western third-tier city. And the number of high-income consumers differed very significantly. And again, Shanghai has a much larger population than Xi'an. So this is not exactly a correct representation. But anyway, we should have represented it using percentages rather than absolute number of consumers. And the share of the Chinese urban households in the 1985, 99.3% are classified as poor. But by 2015, that number shrunk to 23.2%. And hopefully by 2025, it will shrink to 9.7%. And there will be a global affluent population in the urban households. In the disposable income, again, in the 1985, 95% of them are considered poor. And then hopefully by 2025, 2.6% will consider poor in the urban area. We have to stress that it's urban. In terms of the world compared with China, and that is the spread, the world's median is 4,000 and China's median is now 5,660. And then you will also notice that the Chinese curve is much flatter than the world because it's counting population. So that should be reasonable. If it is counting with exact number, then the map, the graph doesn't make sense. The Gini coefficient, had dropped to the lowest point in 2015, gradually rises and then it drops again. And I think the 2020 number will be slightly less than the 2019 number. And then whether it will go up again, we don't know. And we haven't got any information. But yes, it had go through the worst part and then now starting to drop, bounce back a little bit. I think China will try to maintain it at around 46. So the income inequality, and there is the red pre-tax income for the top 10%, and the blue is the pre-tax income for the bottom 80% and the share of the economy. So we are saying that over time, the spread is increasing, okay? The rich is getting a larger share of the economy than the bottom 50%. So that represents a huge increase in income inequality. And here are two graphs in comparison. This one is us, Australia, and the bottom one is United States. Now after what's this day, 1980, we also have a spread. Before that, we are merging together. It's improving, our income inequality is improving. But since the 1980s, it started to spread again. Same for United States. It is in about 1990 when they started spreading again. So this is the inequality. And then another picture showing the Chinese and US compare. The US crossed in 95, 96, and China crossed that in about 2006. But once crossed, United States never come back together, whereas China is still roughly running onto each other with the 10% and 1% curve. And there's another question about the German Central Agriculture Center. So I just get some information, and this is a DC set in Beijing. And there are 3 goals with this center is to ensure food security, improve food safety, and promote sustainability. There's one organization. I find that there is a German and Central in terms of agriculture agreement. Another another organization is this BMEZ, the Sino-German Center for Sustainable Development. Their objectives is based on dialogue, cooperative projects, as well as partnership with business. In terms of climate change, tomorrow's China Today. I will send out the China Today for tomorrow's sessions to the group today, so that if you're interested in looking at what China has done in terms of climate change, you are welcome to join tomorrow. The link is already here, so I can just copy it and then send it out to you. What? Put it back to here. Control C, and then I will go to the chat and then paste it out. So anybody like to join me? It is at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Okay, you can use this link to come in. Okay, any question and discussions from last week? No. Okay, in that case, thank you for coming, and then we will have the last session next week, same time. And then for the regular China Today, you can join me anytime next week as well. Again, they are on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. So no more question?
So will you send that link out to us by
Yeah,
email?
if in the okay, I will send it out in the email as well. Okay. So at the moment, you can actually copy from the chat. It is in the chat at the moment. So either way, I will send it out by email later today. Okay,
Good.
anyway, thank you so much.
Thanks,
and see you
Albert.
next week.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Albert.
Thank you.
Thanks, Albert.
Have a good week.